Hello everyone, my name is Ebbie and I love Nintendo games. For years now, I've wanted a place that I could dedicate to talking about all things Nintendo, so after months of putting it off, I'm finally taking the plunge. I'm gonna be honest, I have a bit of a cold going on right now, but the Switch is coming up and I need to start this channel before then, so I apologise if I sound really nasally. So, as a way to kick off this channel, I thought I'd give you a list of some of my favourite Nintendo games. That way you'll get a really good idea of what it is that I like, and if the things that I talk about interest you, then I'd be really happy if you'd follow along for the journey, but if not, then no pressure. These are just some of the games that I found to be either very memorable, or ones that I deem to be somewhat life-changing. So with that out of the way, let's talk about some Nintendo games, shall we? I can't think of a more fitting way to start off this channel than by talking about a game that has the theme of embarking on a journey right at its core. I am of course talking about the 2010 JRPG known as Xenoblade Chronicles, which was released on the Wii and the Wii U Virtual Console, as well as being the only new 3DS exclusive that currently has a cartridge. I went into Xenoblade Chronicles relatively blind, as I don't really talk to anyone about JRPGs, and I hadn't gone out of my way to find out much information on the game. I knew that Shulk was a character, and that was pretty much it. Going into the game with so few expectations was a huge point in its favour, as I found myself to be completely engrossed by this game for months. There was so much that was special about the Bionis and the Mechonis, and there was so much to love about the cast of characters that I accrued along the way, and the mechanics were not only interesting and new, but also really fun to use, never making the grind feel like too much of a chore. It does of course have a handful of flaws that JRPGs are renowned for, but none of that really mattered to me, as I was so infatuated with this game for such a long time. This game is ridiculously easy to get a hold of now, so I'd absolutely recommend you check it out if you haven't had the chance yet. It's definitely something I'd love to talk more about in the future, so I'll be starting another playthrough of it sometime soon, I'm sure. It's rare that I get to play a game like this with a high level of polish as well as a vast and expansive world, and I'm very excited to see what Monolith can do with Xenoblade Chronicles 2, even if Xenoblade Chronicles X really didn't hit the mark for me. The Legend of Zelda series is somewhat of a must-talk-about thing in terms of Nintendo games, and of course I do adore most of these games. I say most because honestly, I don't think I've played about 80% of the handheld games, but with that being said, there is a special place in my heart for the Zelda experiences I've had, and I adore the franchise as a whole. You know what? I'll even preemptively include Breath of the Wild in the games that I love, because I at least adore the concept of the game. That, and I'm a glass half full kind of person, I guess. But there are two games from the series that really stand out to me. Chronologically, the first game is of course The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. I was always a little bit baffled when people looked at Twilight Princess and said, oh look, Nintendo are finally doing a Dark Zelda game, when Majora's Mask had been sitting there for years and was much darker than Twilight Princess ever was. I will say I did not appreciate this game when I was younger. I played it of course, but a lot of the game's imagery and themes didn't really sit well with a 9-year-old me. But whenever I played this game when I was a teenager, I found that it was much more enjoyable, and the 3DS remake was something greatly welcomed by myself. I even bought the Majora's Mask new 3DS, mainly because the Fierce Deity Mask, which is the best item in any video game. If not incredibly overpowered, yeah, but I appreciate that this game has a very different tone to a lot of Zelda games. I love the 3-day mechanic, and it's a game that gives the optional side quests a lot more worth than other games, as they help to make the world feel like a world. My other favourite Zelda game is one that edges out just ahead of Majora's Mask, and to be completely honest, it's a different experience entirely. The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker is a very special game to me. I honestly struggle to explain why this game currently sits as my favourite Zelda game, but there is nothing that I dislike about this game. I love the colourful and vibrant art style and the unique character designs. I thought the setting was unique while still feeling very much familiar, which was important. And honestly, the way that the story progressed was the best that Zelda had done it up until that point, in my opinion. Maybe it wasn't the best, but I was certainly old enough at that point to enjoy the text instead of mashing the A button as fast as I could to progress. I think that my attachment to this game is also one that has led me to one of the best experiences I've had in my life. That was watching Koji Kondo play Grommal's theme on the piano at the 25th anniversary symphony in London. It was a phenomenal experience that somehow gave me even more love for The Wind Waker. That being said, I still love all of the Zelda games that I've played, from Ocarina of Time to Twilight Princess, and even to games like Hyrule Warriors and Breath of the Wild, probably. When I think of my childhood, I can think of a few very distinct experiences that I had with Nintendo games. The first is playing a Japanese copy of Mario Kart 64 that my dad had imported because he really loved the Super Nintendo. The second is getting blisters in the middle of my hands from the mini-games in Mario Party that made you spin the joystick around as fast as you could. The third is forcing my dad to play Mario Golf and Mario Tennis with me when I was bored. And the fourth, and the most relevant, is of course playing Mario 64, which is one of my all-time favourite games. I've never been a fan of 2D platformers, and the Super Mario Bros. Games weren't really an exception for me, which I'm ashamed to say, to be honest. It's most likely because I'm actually terrible at them. So when I finally got a chance to play Super Mario 64, that was the time when I'd really started to appreciate Mario games, and I've always been a fan of his 3D adventures over his 2D ones. To me, this game is almost perfect. It still controls consistently well, even now, 20 years after its release. For the time, the game looked impressive, and it had a set of worlds that were exciting to explore, but challenging to finish. For a 6-year-old? The only thing that I ever complain about really is the absolutely terrible camera, which can be a real hindrance at times. I always have fun when I play Mario 64, and if I was to pick a game that I wanted to play again for the first time, this would be it. I'd also like to give shout-outs to all the other Mario 3D games that I've played, and I'm so excited to see a new 3D Mario adventure on the horizon with Super Mario Odyssey. Okay, now I get to talk about one of the more inconsistent franchises under Nintendo's belt. Of course I'm going to be talking about Star Fox. I'm actually going to be talking about 2 Star Fox games, and I'm sure some of you will probably be upset by one of them. That's fine. We both have opinions. It's okay. But let's start off with Star Fox 64, or as I'm going to be calling it, Lilac Wars, because I'm European. Lilac Wars was a game that I was undoubtedly obsessed with when I was younger, and I still think it's an amazing experience with some of the best replayability in gaming that I've ever seen. I remember watching my older brother beat the hard route of this game when I was younger, and I think that moment was probably one of the only times that we've properly bonded. It was a game that made me feel pretty amazing, to be honest. It made me feel like I was an arming pilot, and I was the one pulling off the close moves and somersaults, and it made me feel so cool. And I don't think any other franchise has made me feel that way since. Lilac Wars is an amazing game, and I cannot sing its praises enough. However, there is one more Star Fox game that I probably like even more than Lilac Wars. That game is Star Fox Adventures. I remember that there was a time that the mere mention of this game would set old Nintendo fans off into unstoppable rants about how it wasn't a proper Star Fox game. Well, I can't exactly disagree. It completely changed the formula of the series and was originally designed to be its own IP rather than a Star Fox game, so obviously. However, Rareware's last hurrah for Nintendo is one of the most enjoyable experiences I've ever had on the GameCube. I'm unashamed by how much I love this game. I've had my years of hiding it away from people who would probably disagree with me with varying degrees of anger, and I've just accepted the fact that I really like this game and I think it's a good game. It probably would have been a lot better if I weren't forced to cut a ton of features out of the end of the game because of the impending Microsoft buyout, but I still love the experience that we ended up getting. This game is one that I go back to and play at least once a year. I don't know how many times I've completed it, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it every time I've gone back to play it. The worst thing that came out of Star Fox Zero for me was that it retconned Crystal and the entire adventure on Dinosaur Planet. Miyamoto, I love you, but you really do break my heart sometimes. I've been a fan of Pokemon since I was in year 4 at school, and this game series is one that absolutely changed my life for the better. I've already talked about how it's done that before on YouTube, so I'll just link that video in the description if you're curious about that. However, I'm probably going to talk about somewhat of an unexpected game here. I'm going to talk about Pokemon Black and White version, and why it's my favourite game in the series so far. Although it's far from my favourite generation of Pokemon because I'm a dirty, filthy Gen 1er. I'm fascinated by ethics. I studied it for a good number of years at school, and one of the things that really captured my attention in Pokemon Black and White was the antagonist N. He served to be the most interesting antagonist of the series so far, and one of the most realistic in my opinion. N challenges the player to consider that capturing Pokemon, something that we've been doing for years, is unethical, and only causes harm to those lovable creatures. And it's a really interesting dialogue to have in a Pokemon game, and N is the sole reason that I'm in love with Pokemon Black and White. His existence, at least for me, gave the series a new level of depth, which was something I desperately needed after my dislike of Generation 4. There is no other reason really, I just love it. That and my favourite Pokemon of all time lives in this generation. I just can't get enough of my little Smugleaf. So I've rambled for a long time about a lot of different games and a lot of different franchises, and I think that it's about time that I cut to the chase and talked about my favourite game. That game is Fire Emblem Awakening. I have to be honest, I had heard of Fire Emblem before, as had everyone, and I'd even played a little bit of Fire Emblem Binding Blade on the Wii U Virtual Console before I even considered playing Fire Emblem Awakening. I enjoyed Binding Blade a lot, but as I was travelling around a lot of the time, I never really had a lot of time at home to sink my teeth into the game properly. That was when a good friend of mine was visiting from Australia, and when he left the country, he left his copy of Fire Emblem Awakening behind for me to play. This game absolutely changed my outlook on what it was that video games needed in order to be incredible. They couldn't just have one really strong facet. They couldn't just have good characters, or a good story, or good mechanics. In order to be a truly amazing piece of work, video games need everything to be as strong as possible. And none of that had ever been so apparent to me before I played Fire Emblem Awakening, which was a game that had incredibly challenging gameplay for me, characters that I absolutely fell in love with from a few mere interactions, and it was really exposing me to a genre of games that I'd never thought about playing much before. But it had flaws, and I know that. The late game story was quite possibly the only thing preventing me from giving this game a 10 out of 10 in my own mind, which, by the way, I have never done before. Despite the fact that this game did have flaws, I love it dearly, and my first playthrough of this game was something that made me feel genuine emotion. It also spurred me on to get a hold of the older games in the franchise and give those a go too, as I loved this experience so much. Maybe I'm one of those people that will always love Awakening for being my first real exposure to the franchise, but I'm excited to see what the other games in the series hold for me whenever I get the courage to spend over £100 on a boxed copy of Path of Radiance. So in conclusion, those are some of my favourite games, and I hope you've gotten a good idea about what sort of things I'm going to be talking about on this channel in the future. If you're curious, there are some franchises that I've never tried out before, like Kirby and Metroid, but I'm hoping to change that one day in the future. So let me know in the comments of this video what are some of your favourite franchises and games from Nintendo. I'm curious to know, and maybe even get some motivation to find out some older franchises that I've never touched and give them a go. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I will catch you guys later.